Vikram Singh thought he had married the perfect woman in Paris. Anjali, graceful and mysterious, seemed to embody every dream he carried of love and companionship. But behind her smile lay a truth she had fought to keep hidden, a truth that, once uncovered, would shatter their marriage and erupt into violence. Their story, beginning as a fairy tale and ending in betrayal, would grip neighbors, shock the media, and expose how secrecy and rage can turn romance into tragedy. Vikram Singh had always imagined a wedding that would stand out, one that would capture the essence of romance and elegance. Paris, with its cobbled streets, timeless architecture, and the glow of the Eiffel Tower, seemed like the perfect setting to begin his new life. On a cool spring evening, he stood proudly beside his bride, Anjali, as they exchanged vows in front of a handful of invited guests. Everything about the ceremony looked flawless. The carefully chosen venue, decorated with white flowers and golden lights, created a dreamy atmosphere. Vikram's colleagues admired his choice, commenting on how lucky he was to have found such a beautiful partner. Anjali, dressed in an embroidered ivory gown, appeared calm and radiant, her quiet smile captivating the crowd. To those watching, it was a moment of joy and promise. The cameras flashed as the couple posed, hand in hand, the glittering Paris skyline behind them. Friends raised their glasses, and laughter filled the air. Yet beneath the surface, small details went unnoticed. Anjali's eyes often drifted away from the crowd, as if guarding a secret. No family members stood by her side, and when asked, she simply said travel difficulties had kept them away. Vikram brushed off the absence, too caught up in the magic of the evening to question further. As the night unfolded, the newlyweds danced under twinkling lights, while guests whispered about how perfect they looked together. Paris, the city of love, seemed to embrace them with open arms. For Vikram, it was the fulfillment of a dream years in the making. For Anjali, it was the beginning of something far more complicated. The wedding was not just a union, but the start of a story that would soon twist into darkness. Anjali's past remained an enigma to nearly everyone who tried to learn more about her. She told people she had grown up in Mumbai, though she never shared many details about her family. When asked about her parents or siblings, she quickly shifted the conversation, often with a polite smile that concealed discomfort. To Vikram, her reluctance seemed like shyness or perhaps the pain of a complicated past, and he avoided pressing too hard. What mattered to him was the present, and he convinced himself that love was stronger than unanswered questions. According to the story she offered, Anjali had once worked in the fashion industry. She spoke briefly of photo shoots, runways, and the challenges of modeling, though never produced evidence of her career. The way she carried herself, graceful, poised, and elegant, made the claims believable enough for Vikram, who preferred to trust her words rather than search for proof. Her documents, too, appeared genuine. The passport, identity cards, and certificates seemed legitimate at first glance. But if examined carefully, there were small inconsistencies that could have raised doubts. The addresses didn't fully match, dates were slightly off, and some stamps looked newer than others. Vikram overlooked them, too blinded by admiration and the excitement of starting a new life with her. The absence of family at the Paris wedding had caught the attention of a few guests. When questioned, Anjali gave vague answers about relatives being unable to travel because of financial and health issues. She spoke in a soft, almost apologetic tone, which silenced further inquiries. What her new husband did not realize was that these silences and half-truths were not coincidences, but deliberate shields, carefully constructed to protect something far more significant. What looked like mystery was, in fact, a secret waiting to explode. After the wedding celebrations ended, Vikram and Anjali moved into a modest yet charming apartment in a quiet neighborhood of Paris. The building was old but well-maintained, with wrought iron balconies and narrow staircases that echoed with footsteps. For a while, life seemed idyllic. The couple spent their first weeks exploring the city together, sipping coffee in corner cafes, wandering along the Seine, and visiting the famous gardens that tourists adored. Vikram posted smiling photographs on social media, showing himself and Anjali as the picture of happiness. To outsiders, their life looked enviable, the perfect continuation of their dreamy Paris wedding. Yet within the privacy of their home, cracks began to show. Vikram noticed that Anjali always insisted on locking the bedroom door when changing clothes, even when it was unnecessary. She kept her belongings tightly organized, never leaving her suitcase or drawers open. Nights that Vikram imagined would be filled with intimacy often ended in excuses, headaches, fatigue, or vague discomfort. He reassured himself at first, convincing his mind that she only needed time to adjust. Still, unease grew. During outings, Anjali displayed warmth in public, smiling at strangers and engaging in light conversation. But once they were alone, she became withdrawn. Sometimes Vikram caught her staring into the distance, her thoughts heavy with something unsaid. She avoided phone calls in his presence and never mentioned reaching out to her family. Vikram's confusion deepened, though he kept quiet, afraid of sounding mistrustful. On the surface, Paris gifted them beauty and romance. But beneath that charm lay tension that only Vikram could feel. He could not yet understand why his bride appeared to be hiding behind invisible walls. What he saw as minor quirks were signs of a deeper truth quietly pressing against their fragile new marriage. Claire Dubois, the elderly woman who lived in the apartment across from Vikram and Anjali, had grown accustomed to watching people come and go in the building. A retired schoolteacher, she spent most of her days reading by the window or tending to her balcony plants, and it was from this vantage point that she noticed the young couple. At first, she admired their politeness and how neatly they carried themselves, but soon she began to sense that something about their relationship was not quite right. Anjali often hurried past without greeting neighbors, keeping her head low and her steps quick. Claire noticed her avoiding small talk, almost as if afraid of being asked questions she did not want to answer. Julian, the building's caretaker, also had his suspicions. He was a practical man, responsible for repairs and maintenance, but he was observant. He often saw Vikram leaving for work in the mornings, while Anjali stayed inside most of the day, rarely venturing out unless accompanied. On the few occasions she did step outside alone, she appeared tense, scanning her surroundings as though she feared being recognized. When Julian casually greeted her, she responded politely, but with a nervous smile that faded too quickly. Claire discussed these small observations with Julian over cups of tea. Neither of them wanted to intrude, but both agreed that the atmosphere around the newlyweds felt strained. It wasn't the kind of tension that came from ordinary adjustment in marriage. It was heavier, as if there was an invisible burden pressing down on Anjali. To others in the building, the couple seemed ordinary, yet to Claire and Julian, something whispered of secrecy. Their quiet suspicions would later prove important when events inside the apartment spiraled beyond anyone's imagination. As the weeks slipped by, Vikram's growing unease began to harden into frustration. The first days of married life had been filled with optimism, but that hope was slowly replaced by questions he could not silence. He longed for closeness with his new wife, yet Anjali continued to avoid intimacy, offering gentle excuses that no longer sounded convincing. Each time he tried to bridge the distance, she retreated further, and the silence between them deepened. What troubled him most was not just the lack of physical affection, but the secrecy that surrounded every part of her life. He started to notice details he had overlooked earlier. Among her toiletries were unusual prescriptions with names he didn't recognize. Some were clearly related to hormones, though he pretended not to understand. Whenever he asked about them, she brushed the questions aside, insisting they were for minor health issues. Vikram wanted to believe her, but the explanations never satisfied him. Her reluctance to let him near her suitcase, the way she always locked drawers, and the way she guarded her phone with such intensity only added to the growing list of doubts. Anjali's habits became patterns he could no longer ignore. She avoided mirrors when dressing in his presence, often disappearing into the bathroom for long stretches. Sometimes he caught her looking at herself in ways that seemed filled with worry, as if she feared her own reflection might betray her. Vikram struggled between love and suspicion, trying to silence the nagging questions that haunted him. The marriage, which had begun under Paris's romantic glow, was beginning to unravel quietly. Beneath the smiles they wore in public, a fragile bond was straining under the weight of secrets. The trust Vikram once held was slipping away, replaced by a storm he could no longer control. One evening, while Anjali was out shopping, Vikram's restless curiosity overcame him. For days he had been haunted by the feeling that something in their marriage was deeply wrong, and the unanswered questions gnawed at his mind. He moved quietly through the apartment, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on her suitcase tucked in the corner of the closet. Normally, it was locked, but this time it was slightly open, as though she had left in a hurry. His pulse quickened as he knelt down and carefully unzipped it. Inside, he found documents neatly stacked beneath layers of clothing. At first, everything looked ordinary: an Indian passport, certificates, and medical papers. But as he examined them, his heart froze. The passport bore the name Samir, not Anjali. The birth certificate confirmed the same, listing a male identity. Some of the medical records were from clinics in Mumbai and Paris, referencing hormone treatments and surgeries. The truth hit him like a crushing wave. His wife had been living a life carefully constructed on hidden foundations. Shock quickly turned into anger. Vikram's mind raced with images of the wedding, the vows, and the life he believed he was building. Now all of it felt like a cruel deception. He imagined the judgment of friends, colleagues, and family if this truth ever surfaced. The thought of humiliation ignited a rage he could not contain. By the time Anjali returned, carrying grocery bags and unaware of what had been discovered, Vikram's emotions had spiraled into something uncontrollable. He felt betrayed, not just as a husband, but as a man. The apartment that once symbolized a new beginning was suddenly suffocating, filled with documents that revealed a past she had desperately tried to hide. The moment of confrontation was inevitable, and it would end in violence. That night, the quiet of the Paris apartment shattered into chaos. Anjali sensed something was wrong the moment she entered and saw the suitcase unzipped on the bed. Vikram's eyes burned with fury, his hands trembling as he pointed to the documents scattered across the floor. The air was thick with tension, and before she could explain, his anger erupted. He hurled accusations, his voice rising into a storm of rage that spilled into every corner of the apartment. Neighbors later recalled hearing the first crash, a glass striking the wall and shattering. What followed was the unmistakable sound of struggle: furniture scraping against the floor, sharp cries, and muffled pleas. Vikram, consumed by the discovery, lashed out violently. His fists and words struck with equal cruelty, each action fueled not by reason, but by humiliation and fear of exposure. Anjali tried to defend herself, retreating into corners, but there was nowhere to escape inside the small apartment. Claire Dubois, reading by her window across the hall, froze when the noise reached her ears. She had suspected unease between the couple, but this was different. The sounds were desperate, frantic. Without hesitation, she rushed to Julian, the caretaker, who was finishing his evening rounds. Together, they knocked on the door, calling out, but the chaos inside continued. Julian quickly alerted the police, his voice urgent as he described what they heard. Moments later, officers arrived, forcing entry into the apartment. Inside, they found Anjali on the floor, bruised and shaken, her face marked with fresh injuries. Vikram stood pacing in the center of the room, his breathing heavy, his rage not yet cooled. The evidence of violence was undeniable: broken glass, overturned chairs, and a silence that fell heavy once the shouting stopped. Police officers wasted no time securing the apartment once they entered. Vikram was immediately restrained, his protests echoing as handcuffs clicked around his wrists. He claimed he had been provoked, that he was the victim of betrayal, but the evidence around him told another story. Broken furniture, shattered glass, and blood on the floor painted a picture of uncontrolled violence. Anjali, trembling and clutching her arm, was escorted gently to a chair while paramedics were called to treat her injuries. Her eyes were red with tears, but her silence spoke volumes about the trauma she had endured. The officers collected everything that could be used in the case. The scattered documents revealing Anjali's identity were bagged as evidence, alongside the medical prescriptions and papers Vikram had uncovered. Photographs were taken of the room in its disarray, capturing the aftermath of the brutal confrontation. Claire and Julian were interviewed in the hallway, both recounting the sounds they had heard: the screams, the crashes, the unmistakable signs of violence. Their testimonies added weight to the unfolding case. At the police station, Vikram's statements shifted between anger and despair. He spoke of deception, of humiliation, and of cultural expectations he felt had been betrayed. Yet no explanation justified the violence. The officers noted his lack of remorse, his focus on his own wounded pride rather than the injuries of his wife. Meanwhile, Anjali gave her statement in quiet, halting words. She admitted she had hidden her past out of fear of rejection, fear of violence, fear that her truth would destroy any chance at love. That fear, tragically, had proven right. By the time the reports were completed, Vikram was formally charged with assault. The case was no longer private. It was now a matter of law, evidence, and justice. The case erupted into headlines almost overnight. Newspapers in Paris carried the story first, detailing the shocking assault inside a quiet apartment and the hidden truth behind the marriage. Soon, international outlets picked it up, and the names Vikram Singh and Anjali were broadcast across television screens and online platforms. Photographs from their Paris wedding, smiling faces beneath the Eiffel Tower, were placed side by side with stark reports of violence, creating a contrast that fascinated and horrified readers. In India, the story ignited heated debates. Some voices framed Vikram as a man deceived, unable to cope with the revelation of his wife's past. Others condemned him as an abuser who chose brutality over understanding. Social media platforms turned the couple into subjects of endless commentary, with hashtags spreading rapidly. The narrative was no longer just about one violent night. It became a conversation about gender identity, secrecy, and cultural expectations. In Paris, advocacy groups rallied around Anjali, highlighting her story as an example of the dangers transgender individuals face when fear of stigma forces them into silence. Interviews with experts filled television panels, while journalists camped outside the courthouse waiting for developments. Every new detail added fuel to the media frenzy. For Vikram, the consequences extended beyond the courtroom. His professional life unraveled within days. Colleagues distanced themselves, his company suspended him, and the once respected consultant became a figure of public disgrace. Anjali, though recovering physically, found herself thrust unwillingly into the role of a symbol, someone whose private pain had been transformed into a public cause. What began as whispers between neighbors had become a global story. The wedding that had once looked like a dream now stood as a cautionary tale, dissected by strangers across countries who would never know the real weight of what had happened behind closed doors. The trial that followed was swift but intense, drawing attention from both the French public and international media. Vikram appeared in court dressed formally, but the weight of his actions clung to him. He tried to defend himself by repeating claims of betrayal, saying that his trust had been broken. Yet the court focused on the violence, not the secrets. Photographs of Anjali's injuries, witness accounts from Claire and Julian, and the police records painted a clear and undeniable picture. The judges made it clear that regardless of circumstances, physical assault could not be excused. Anjali sat quietly through the hearings, her face pale but determined. She had survived a brutal night, and though her body carried bruises, the deeper wounds were invisible. With the support of Claire and Julian, who attended every session, she found the courage to tell her story. Her testimony revealed years of fear of being rejected, abandoned, or hurt if the truth of her identity was exposed. That fear had become reality in the worst possible way, yet she refused to let it silence her anymore. When the verdict was delivered, Vikram was sentenced to several years in prison. The decision was seen as a statement by the French courts. Violence against partners, regardless of circumstance, would not be tolerated. For Vikram, it was the collapse of everything he had built, his marriage, his career, his reputation. For Anjali, it was both an ending and a beginning. She carried the scars of betrayal and assault, but she also gained a small measure of justice. In the weeks that followed, Anjali began therapy and legal steps for her protection. With Claire and Julian offering quiet companionship, she slowly rebuilt her sense of self. Paris, the city where her dream had turned to nightmare, became the place where she also began her path to recovery.